We are on our way to Columbia, Kentucky, to the home of Phil Hanna, who's the son of Ed and Arpanay Hanna. Ed and Arpanay were mission workers to Syria and Lebanon from 1954 to 1986.
These are kind of personal reports they
Right.
wrote in the 50s and 60s.
So this is Gasiba Kairouz, who had a premonition of his own death during the Civil War.
This is a story about a man who was killed.
To my fellow countrymen, I say, those who live in the same house can have their differences, but without hating each other. They can be angry with one another, but without becoming enemies. They can argue with one another, but without killing each other.
They felt that it was their duty and responsibility to continue to minister to the people of Lebanon during that period of crisis.
But before I ever went to a welfare camp, my father went in 1948, and this was his first visit, and my mother was there as a volunteer. And the young women volunteers were anticipating the arrival of this new American. And so they decided they would test his character, and they salted some water, and when he asked for some water, they gave him the salted water, and he drank it without flinching. And my mother thought, this is a good guy. I had a little sweetie in the school who was the barber's daughter. I have another early memory was raiding the watermelon rind pickles in my mother's cabinet. If you've ever had watermelon rind pickles, they are wonderful. It was kind of a nice set of memories. One of the people my parents kind of embraced and was a young man named Mufid, and this is a picture of him. And as a young man, I think he had parasites in his brain, and they were able to get him some medical care, and he had surgery, and they put a steel plate in his brain. He was a really sweet person, and you can kind of see that.
Lebanon, Robert Murphy, the State Department's ace troubleshooter, met President Camille Chamoun, opening his task of mediating some compromise between Lebanon's clashing factions that would permit withdrawal of United States troops. New presidential elections have already been deferred to permit the choice of a candidate acceptable to all. The Mideast was quiet, but American evacuees from Iraq were arriving in Rome, 10 hours away. In the first group were 36 women, 54 children. Nearly 300 Americans have left since
And then in 1958, sometime in May, we got word that the rebels were in the area and that we had to leave if we were going to catch the ship. And so we packed in about 30 minutes to an hour. We got to a coastal village whose name I can't remember, but and the officer there said, I can't let you go any further. And this was before Tripoli, I think. North of Tripoli. And we got to the coastal village, and he said, I can't let you go on, and but I can give you a military escort tomorrow, but you'll need to spend the night. So he put us up in his house. And so the next day, the altars, and the officer offered to buy my dad's car, which was kind of an offer he couldn't refuse, so he sold him the car for a very modest amount. And we used to see it years later. Dad would see a car and he'd say, there's our car. So, and whether it was or not, we don't know, but we would see it from time to time. We went to Beirut. I don't remember arriving. I just remember we went to the missionary compound, and we went to live in what was the compound house. It was a 2-story house near what was then the Neary School of Theology and some of the synod offices. And the Gepfords, another missionary family, lived upstairs from us. And then there was a point where the shooting got to be all day long.
The first contingent of Marines to depart from Lebanon embarks on landing ships at a Beirut beach, almost a month after the landings that electrified the world.
And some people came with a large SUV, and we hunkered down, and they took us to the University Christian Center, which was a 7-story building near the American University of Beirut, and they put us in an apartment there.
During the 1967 Arab-Israeli War, you guys were evacuated.
Yes. And the first Monday was the first day of the war. When word came out that Americans were flying Israeli planes, of course, at first everyone thought the Arabs were winning, and then I remember Monday, 10 Israeli jets shot down, 20 Israeli jets shot down, 30 Israeli jets shot down. And then the truth came in that the Arabs had lost most of their air force on the ground.
But after the formal establishment of Israel in 1948, open warfare erupted often, killing thousands and creating millions of homeless refugees.
So Mom stayed with her parents, and we packed up, and we were going to go up to Schweier to hang out. Schweier was the retreat center, and there were apartments door Schweier. And when we got to the Synod offices, my dad's colleagues kind of sat down and said, "We think you really need to leave." So on Tuesday or Wednesday, and I think it was probably Wednesday, we went down to the American University of Beirut, where there was a long line of Americans lining up to be processed. And we just waited. I had not been on AUB's campus much. We waited, and then we were bused to the airport, and at the airport they said to us, "Do you want to go to Italy or do you want to go to Germany?" And we kind of looked at each other, and we looked at Dad, and no one spoke. So I said, "Germany." My parents had been convinced by the Hills that instead of continuing at the Sidon School, that we needed to go to the American Community School to kind of get us acclimatized to American culture. I was not around many Americans during my childhood. They were occasional visitors. Later in 1975, the Civil War began, and I think it started out with a shooting of a bus wedding party, and it just went from bad to worse.
And your parents stayed?
They stayed. They stayed most of those years.
I've read one of your father's letters, sort of writing back home. It's one of the Dear Friends letters, where he says, "This is our mission. We're supposed to stay around people who are our friends and our family."
Yes.
Yeah.
I found a letter from Syngman Rhee when he was mission coordinator for the Middle East. And this was in the 80s during some of the worst part of the shooting. And he kind of says, "I wish I could be there with you guys." And thereafter that, during the other parts of the Civil War, we would get letters saying so-and-so is going to the embassy, so he'll get these letters out for you, or we've sent letters with someone who's going to Egypt, they will mail them to you. My family, they were very good letter writers. My grandmother wrote letters even into her 80s, handwritten or typed. She could do both. I have letters my brothers wrote. I've given them some of them, but I found some more. We were all good letter writers, single-spaced, wide, narrow margins.
Your dad, Ed, was also a prolific photographer.
Well, he took a lot of slides, yes. And I'm going through those bit by bit. You've got some of them.
We were looking at...
So
we were looking at the 1982 war damage slides that your dad took. Why was he documenting the damages from it?
I remember I was so angry at the Israelis for going all the way to Beirut and doing so much damage. This is a slideshow, but I still haven't found the slides. They might be in a carousel.
From 83.
From 83.
Do you think you have the carousel here?
I have some carousels, and I've looked at some of them, and in some ways some of the slides match maybe, but then they change.
For now is not the time for talk alone. Now is a time for action, to act together to restore peace to Beirut, to help a stable government emerge that can restore peace and independence to all of Lebanon, and to bring a just and lasting resolution to the conflict between Israel and its Arab neighbors.
It was when Ben Weir was kidnapped.
Yeah.
When he was kidnapped, Dad decided that it wasn't safe for Westerners in West Beirut, so he went to live, I think, in a little dorm room on the other side of Beirut. And I don't know that he ever came back to Ross Beirut. Mom would cross the line to go visit him every 2 weeks or so. I think telephone communication was probably working some of the time then. But I think after a year of that, of kind of living separately and kind of realizing you couldn't do that much anymore, they decided to retire. So I think people remember him kindly and as a good person. There was interest in people in the village in this history that I would like to see continued and that I can contribute to, and you're certainly doing some work on that. So
I'm just trying to get my facts straight.
yeah. So
I called your father blonde. I need to amend the record.
there are not many people who remember that era.